Do you have to be healed to help people? And perhaps another way, a better way to ask that same question is how healed do you have to be to help people? That is what we will be discussing this morning, this afternoon, this evening here on the podcast. Okay. When you work in a helping profession, and that means you could be an employee, a nurse, a doctor, a therapist, teacher, police officer, et cetera, or you can be an entrepreneur, coach, consultant, healer, all the names that we strategists, all these different names that we give ourselves in the entrepreneur space. When you're specifically in a helping profession, you impact people's lives in a very real way, as opposed to all of the other positions that you could have. You could be a waiter, or you could work in retail, or you could be building a SaaS, some kind of software. Like you could literally be doing all these things that also impact people, but in a different kind of way. Okay. When you're in these particular fields, meaning helping professionals, you should take your work more seriously than others. Okay. We're going to talk about why, in case it's not obvious, but also equally as important is that one of the questions that often either comes up directly in my work or is the undertone when I'm working with people is, when are you healed enough? When are you expert enough, right, to be working with people? Because one of the things that I often find is that people with high integrity can think that they don't have enough of something to be able to do the work, right? So today's podcast episode is really designed to address this tension between yes, you should, but also how much. Meaning, yes, you should take the work seriously. Yes, you should be mindful of, the fact that you are impacting people in a real way while simultaneously managing your expectations of yourself and where you have to be in order to be qualified to do that. And yes, you are getting my man voice this morning because I am recording this podcast early in the AM. Okay. I contemplated not recording this podcast because I always wake up with a man voice. Okay. But I decided you're going to get what you're going to get and we're not going to throw a fit. Okay. That's what I decided. So here we go. I think the first and most important thing that we need to just get out in the open is that this idea of being 100% healed is not a thing. Okay. No matter what work you do, no matter what age you are, no matter how much credentials and expertise you have, you are not 100% healed. It's not a thing. Okay. So this idea of waiting until you are 100% healed, 100% whole, is a waste of your gifts and your talents. Okay. That's the first and perhaps one of the more important things to take away from this. And simultaneously, right, hear that, it's not a period there, there's a comma. Simultaneously, it is dangerous to do the work, right, when you are significantly unhealed. Now, we could use a different word other than unhealed, but that's going to be our universal kind of catch-all term for you're personally not in a good enough place, emotionally, mentally, whatever we want to call it, to do the work without harming people. You might be in a great place mentally, emotionally enough to do the work, but can you do the work without harming people? Right? Because we hear this quote all the time: hurt people, but you don't realize that you're the hurt person. It's like, no, that's other people. That's like people who, and it's like, oh no, you've been hurt too. It's like you have your own trauma, you have your own history, and it could be little T trauma or big T trauma. right? We always think about big T trauma as like sexual abuse and physical abuse and going to war and, things like that. But there are tons of little T trauma that also changes you into a hurt person, which then causes you to give ill advice, which is like half the internet, but neither here nor there. Okay. When you are a hurt person, what often happens is that you either intentionally or unintentionally hurt people. Okay. So intentionally are, let me think of a good example. So the people, let's use, it's going to be a touchy subject today. Okay. Just breathe with me. But the first thing that I thought about is the historical context where a lot of KKK members would be in positions of power, whether it be police officers or doctors or lawyers or judges, right? And it's like, here's a clear example of how your own biases, your own hurt, your own perspective, your own beliefs hurt people intentionally, right? And then we have all of these places where we hurt people unintentionally. Okay, so here's an example of unintentional hurt, right? I saw a TikTok the other day of a guy who is clearly a coach, works with couples and men, and he does a lot around masculine, feminine, and different things like that. And he basically did a video that says, "I don't believe that women are good." That was the gist of it. I'm not quoting him exactly, but he literally said very strong words about, "I just don't believe women can bring good things." And it's like, oh, I need to deal with my own issues because I'm coaching men and women. And this thought, this belief is trickling into my work. That's an example of him unintentionally hurting people. Because if you truly believe that women are not good people, there are going to be things that you say that are counterproductive in your work specifically, because it's not like he thinks women are bad people and then he builds bridges. Okay. No, he thinks women are bad people and is actually working with women and men. Okay. So that's an example of where he was having his own revelation, where he was like, I didn't realize that this was actually a deep seated belief. I would have never said that out loud. Like, he wasn't saying that out loud to clients, obviously, but he did catch himself saying something or doing something that he realized he had to sit with and be like, oh, wait, that actually came from a place that's not healthy. So my point here is we intentionally and unintentionally hurt people. Okay. Which is why we do need to take our work seriously. Okay. But the flip side of this, though, is that you can take your work so seriously that you carry it in the wrong way. And the objective of this podcast is to help you take your work seriously, but not carry it in such a heavy way that it bogs you down. Because when you think you have to be 100% healed, or when you think you don't have enough of, be it again, expertise or healing or whatever, when you think that way without there being some commas around it, you're carrying it in a heavy way, right? I had a client the other day where she's had a nonprofit before and is rebuilding her nonprofit. She went through divorce and, had lots of things happen. And so she's in the process of like healing that process and then also getting back into the work. And she knows she's not fully ready to jump straight back into the nonprofit, for to rebuild the business. She doesn't feel like she's there yet, but she also doesn't know what to do in the meantime, right? She's feeling lots of different things. And what I explained to her is, perhaps you're not ready to build the nonprofit, right? That's that by her words, not mine. I didn't tell her that. Okay. But if you don't feel ready and you have non-ego, non-trauma reasons for feeling that way, recognize that that doesn't mean that you can't mentor women, that you can't help women. Like, it doesn't mean that you can't do anything in this field. It just means that you're choosing not to do this thing over here. But there is a whole spectrum of other things that you can do that would feed your soul. Because I think sometimes what people don't realize, particularly in the entrepreneur space, when you're outside of like an employee role where you are in impact, is that you need impact to feel fulfilled. If you are, and I'm not saying universally, I'm saying if you are a helper, if you are an impact driven person, then to get into a business, right, or to have seasons of your life where you are not impactful can be challenging. Doesn't mean you don't need seasons like that, but it can't be a lifestyle. Why? Because you're wired away. That's a whole different podcast. Okay. So my objective here is to help you carry the responsibility that you feel differently. Because right now you got a lot of stuff in your backpack and you don't need to carry all that with you. Okay. So I'm going to give you 3 or 4 things that will help you. And then I'm going to give you one warning. Okay. All right. So the first thing that I think is a really important piece, if you're struggling with this tension, is that you need to have a practice. Okay. And here's what I mean. You have things that shape your thinking and your behavior that cause you to become who you are, right? You have things that shape your thinking and your behavior. The way you think about money, the way you think about women, the way you think about kids, the way you think about hard work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The way you think about every subject and the way you behave around every topic, around every incident comes from somewhere. Okay. They shape you, i.e., who you become. And who you are right now impacts people for good or for bad. Okay. And when you're in integrity with yourself, I'm not talking about with a role, a business, a job. When you're in integrity with yourself, you have a practice. And equally as important, when you are an employer of people, you have a practice for your workers. And I mean those who are in direct care, meaning they work directly with people, as well as those who are in leadership. Both of those groups need their own practice. This is a non-negotiable for me. And when I say practice, what I'm basically saying is a practice is when you have a regular check-in about you, not necessarily about the work that you're doing, not necessarily about your expertise, okay? Not necessarily about the business or the company or the job or the title, but just about you. How are you feeling about you? How are you feeling about your weight? How are you feeling about your family? How are you feeling about your own happiness, your fulfillment, et cetera, et cetera? How do you, what kind of beliefs do you have? You start with you and then it can morph into the work, right? If I am a health coach, as an example, then it would make sense for me to have a practice where I do regularly check in with myself about how I feel about health practices. Let's say, what's the role of AI in health practices? What's the role of medicine, right? And health practices, right? It starts with a regular check-in with you and what's going on with you. Because if you're going, let's say you are a health coach and you're in the midst of a tough time with your kids, or you're caregiving and it's really exhausting, or you're going through a divorce or changing careers, whatever it may be, your personal life does affect or has the potential to affect and often does affect how you show up with your clients. That's why the check-in starts personal and then can morph into things that are related to your field. Okay. Now I will say that it is almost always true that it takes you longer to see what others can see much quicker because you're right. We hear the analogy of the frame and being in the frame versus out of the frame. And it's like, well, you're in the frame. You're the picture, right? So you can't see all the things that people on the outside can see. This is why it has to be a practice meaning this is not I do it once or twice. It's like, no, this is my regular life because it will take you longer to see something that someone else can see much quicker. One of the reasons why people come to me is because I can see things quicker, right? Right. One of the skill sets that I have is diagnosis of this is why your business is not working. This is why you're not happy, right? This is why your business not right. Like I can see things that you can't see. I'm not in the frame, right? So part of how you manage the fact that it will take you longer to see, number one, is by having an ongoing practice, right? So that way it doesn't take you as long to see, right? But this is also why you involve other people, therapists, coach, mentors, whatever. Okay. So that's number one, have a practice. Number two, be an expert at your craft, not a novice, okay, at your craft, an expert. And I don't mean an expert in all the things surrounding your craft. Okay. So if you run a business as an example, okay, or let's just say you are a husband or a wife because you are impacting people. If you're a husband or a wife, you are a leader in that capacity. Okay. The same way that if you were running a business. So when I say an expert in your craft, let's say I'm a husband. I might not know everything as a husband. As a matter of fact, you don't know everything as a husband. But the role that you have as a husband, like your primary role. So let's separate all the roles. Okay, so the husband might be fixing things in the house. They might be cutting grass and doing things outside the house. They might be, helping with kids if they have kids. Like they could be working and having like there's literally all these roles that they're playing. But what is your primary role as a husband? It is the leadership and the head of the house. So you need to take that role more seriously and be an expert at that thing. So that means reading books about leadership. It means getting in mindset programs or therapy or mentoring. Doesn't matter whether it's podcasts or books or, use whatever medium that you want. But what I am saying is instead of focusing on, oh, I'm going to learn how to, fix the things in the house. That's a great asset to have. We love men who fix things. And it's also not the most important part. When I say expert at your craft, I'm talking about keeping the main thing the main thing. Same thing if you were running a business. There are lots of things you need to know as a business owner: marketing and sales and automation and team and legal and all of this stuff. But I'm talking about expert in your craft. Let's use the health coach again. If I am a health coach, then I need to be a expert in the health space, not necessarily in marketing and sales. I need to have some marketing and sales experience, but that's not the place where I absolutely need to be an expert. Okay. So the point is on the parts that matter the most, study, learn, be intentional, have a practice, right? One of the things that I loved, it wasn't very effective to be clear, but I love the idea of it is people having a personal curriculum, right? It's like you set your own personal development thing, things that I do for myself as a part of my annual planning with my business is I also have a personal development plan, which means I'm being intentional. Each quarter, I am reading a certain kind of book. I am consuming a certain kind of content. I am focused on a certain kind of habit. It is not willy nilly over here. Why? Because I take the work that I do seriously. Okay. Again, not to be confused with sometimes I'm learning about business stuff as well, marketing and sales, etc. But I always have a psychological aspect to the work, right? Meaning my own personal development plan is focused on my expertise more than it is focused on everything else. And to be clear, I want to stress this. It is not because something is wrong with you. A lot of times I see people who are self-proclaimed self-help junkies or, they're really into personal development. They really value growth. I'm in that group. I love growth. Like it is one of my core values. But the problem is sometimes people are a self-help junkie because they're viewing themselves as broken. It's like, oh, we're not doing this work because we're broken. No, no, no. If you do it from a place of brokenness, then you will also bleed on the people who you're trying to help. You're not broken, friend. We're not committed to our craft because we're broken. We're committed to excellence. That's why we're doing it. Like you see, there needs to be a mindset shift here. Otherwise, you don't get the results that you're looking for. Right? It's like if you do it with the wrong intention, right? If you do it from the wrong place, you don't reap the ROI. Okay, so that's number two. Be an expert at your specific craft. Number three, and perhaps this is really, really at number one. I don't know, they're all number one to me. Be rigorous with the people who you work with, meaning the type of people that you work with. I know you think you can help everyone. You can't. I'm just be honest with you. You cannot. A lot of people have this conversation around niching, and they're having the conversation around niching from the wrong place. This is not about whether your expertise can help a certain group or not. It is that you can't help every group. Your expertise, if I know how to sew, as an example, I could teach lots of different people how to sew. And because I can teach lots of different people how to sew, it makes people not want to niche because the expertise could help a lot of people. But we're not talking about your expertise, right? Your knowledge may be helpful for a lot of people, a wide group of people, right? What I'm talking about is your personality and your skill set and your capacity. Like I'm pausing there for a reason because a lot of times we think our expertise, because our expertise can help people, we don't need to select people who should be in our programs. Anybody can come in with a pulse and a paycheck. And it's like, oh, you're not committed to excellence if you do that. Why? Here's a great example. So I've seen a lot of successful coaches, meaning they make a lot of money, right? They're good at one part of what they do, and they should not be working with new coaches. Why? Because not because they don't have the expertise, not because they don't have the experience. If I've built $1 million coaching business, then there's a good chance that I could teach you how to build $1 million coaching business. The problem is when you're working with different groups of people, they require different things. Newbies require more detail and they require greater patience. A lot of successful coaches are not very detailed and they're not very patient. Those have nothing to do with your expertise. However, they are required. In order to serve a newbie well, you need a certain level of detail and you need patience as well as your expertise. The same in the nonprofit world, right? I see a lot of nonprofits that take anybody into their program just because they have space, right? But we should all have criteria, prerequisites for the type of people we let into our programs. I could not stress this enough. Partly to ensure that your program is effective, but partly so we don't hurt people. You have to know who your program is for, who it delivers for, and who it doesn't, and then fully accept that. That's the most important part because a lot of us are aware. We know we're not that patient, right? We know that we're not that detailed, but we're still trying to serve everybody. We're still, and it's like, oh, you haven't fully accepted who you are. And thus you're in your own way and you are now harming people. It's not just about you. You need to consider them as well. Just because your expertise can help lots of people doesn't mean you can. Okay, dead horse. Let's not beat it. Here's the last one that I want to give. So let's go. You have a practice. You are an expert in your craft and ongoing, right? You have your own, plan for mastery. Because here's the thing, a lot of people think they're experts at their craft. I see this a lot with like high performers, and everyone thinks they're a high performer if they've made six figures, or if they've made multiple six figures, or if they've won awards, or. right? But what I'm talking about is not, when I say expert at your craft, I'm saying move from being a high performer to an elite performer. That's what I'm asking you to do. That's how you ensure you don't harm people. High performer is like everybody in the NBA. Every single one of those high performers. Every single person in the NBA could beat 75% of the people on the planet in basketball. That makes you a high performer. But what I'm talking about is elite performance. That's what I mean when I say mastery. There is a set of, I don't know how many men there are in the NBA, I'm gonna make it up, but let's say that they were 1,000 men, which they are not, by the way. The number is lower than that, I believe. But let's just say for round numbers that there was 1,000 men who were all elite, or they were all high performers because they made it to the NBA. There's only 100 of them that are elite. The other 900 are high performers, but they're not elite performers. And what I'm saying is, when you are an expert in your craft, you're going from high performance to elite performance. Okay, I went backwards a little bit. Here's the one thing I want to say before I give you my warning. If you have those three things, you have a practice, you have expertise, and you are rigorous with who it is that you work with, then your last and final step is to let the rest go. Let the rest go. Again, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a therapist, you will not get it right 100% of the time. And walking around beating yourself up or shaming yourself, or, right, that's what makes you have a heavy book bag, is that the way you're carrying your responsibility is making your bag heavier than it needs to be. This is where trust has to come in. I've done the part that I'm responsible for. I've done the part that I know to do with the first three steps. Then my next step is just trust that if I make a mistake as a parent or as a therapist or whatever, that it will work itself out. And I think the thing that we have to understand is the difference between saving, serving, and supporting. Like, when we're in these helping professions, we're not saving people. It is not our job to save people. Okay. Very rarely, like, there's a 5% or less of the professions that are actually that are supposed to save people. If you are a doctor on an operating table, perhaps, right? Like that makes a little more sense. If you are a nurse that is in war driven times, and to be clear, I think there's an argument to be made that you're not saving those people either, but that's a whole different podcast. I'm just saying that I realize that there are these professions where the stakes are higher, okay? And we could make a case that you are saving people. But what I mean here is that if you're in a helping profession, you do not have ownership of the outcome. You don't have ownership of whether this person changes their life. You have a responsibility. You need to separate responsibility from ownership, because the only ownership you have is on your own life. And even we could argue you don't have ownership there either, but we won't, because that's a different podcast. I am making it very clear that when I work with people, I do not. I used to say this all the time when I was a therapist and I was working with addiction clients, which I loved, by the way. It's like, oh, I don't work harder than you work. This not my life. This your life. Like, my job is to be supportive. My job is to serve in certain ways, but I'm not here to save you. I'm never going to work harder than you work. My job is to come alongside you as you work. That is what you're doing as a helping profession. But when we're carrying the work very heavily, we're not just taking on responsibility, we're taking on ownership. And that is unhealthy, my friend. It will cause you to enable people and be codependent in your work. We should do a whole episode about that. When we are not called to enable people, we're called to support, not save. Okay, here's the last thing that I want to say here. This is my one caveat here. This work requires a high level of self-awareness and a high level of self-acceptance. And unfortunately, most people are not very self-aware and they're not very self-accepting, right? Most people do a lot of lying to themselves. They minimize their own beliefs, their own behaviors, both the good and the bad. The trauma blinds them. There are all these things that keep you from being self-aware and self-accepting. And so this is why you need other people to support you. You will never, and I mean never, become the best version of yourself by yourself. It would just not happen. You cannot do it. I'm sorry, friend. Now, I don't think that means you need to be in therapy at all times, right? That's why you have your own practice, because sometimes you're in therapy and sometimes you have your own practice. Sometimes you have a mentor or a coach and sometimes you have your own practice. But I do think that people are influential. They are critical to you being the kind of leader that you want to be. This is why if you are an employer, you must have a practice for your employee because they are not self-aware. They are not self-accepting. It will take them much longer to see things that we need to be protecting the people that they're serving from. Right? I just want to put that caveat there because no matter whether you're doing these 3 things that I laid out or 4 things that I laid out above, there are going to be seasons where you need help. And I pray that you are open to that. And of course, if you need a place to do this work, DM me. Right? We have a whole program called the Helper School that is specifically for helpers, working with you in lots of different ways and the things that we mentioned here, but also to help you not self-sacrifice so much. And like, I won't even get into all of that because if you're interested, I can just send you details and info on what our different tracks are and, what they focus on. I just want you to know I'm available for those of you who are interested.